Welcome to Perspectives with Asima Silva. I'm glad you're joining us again. And as I've said before in my previous show, I am going to cover a topic that is a very sensitive topic, especially in the current events. Last time I spoke, I know that there's been some discussion on the word war versus conflict. Is it an Israeli-Palestinian war, or is it considered a conflict? I personally don't like the word war because one is a state army that is one of the world's largest and strongest militaries versus another population that has fringe people, fringe groups and organizations that are maybe taking their resistance a little too far. But calling it a war is also unfair. Calling a conflict also diminishes the essence of the seriousness of the issue. I don't know exactly what word to use, but we are definitely going to talk about this topic. Our guest tonight is Hind. She's a teenager, a very well-spoken teenager. She has actually been on this show previously, talking about her Palestinian experience and her family. And she is today courageous enough to speak about this topic again. I met her at the Sunday rally this last Sunday at Worcester City Hall, where we were doing a pro-Palestinian rally. And when I say pro-Palestinian, it does not mean anti-Jewish. What it means is we are standing up against an apartheid racist state. That is what the rally was about, for whatever you might have heard or read in comments. Now, when I met her, she actually had words that she wanted to share. She didn't get a chance to, and I invited her again on this show so that she, as a Palestinian young teenager in America, an American Palestinian, can share her words. And thank you again for joining us today. I know this is a hot topic. I know this is something I'm sure in school you have been asked. So before we begin, first of all, introduce yourself, and I know it's been probably a year or so since you've been back on the show. But how is it going in school?
So my name's Hind. I go to Wachusett. My favorite topics that we're learning about in school right now, well, I'm doing an independent study into U.S. and Israeli influence in the Middle East, and also my ethics class. I would say that those are the two most interesting. As for school, it's been kind of mixed. I've had a couple people, mostly Arabs and Muslims, I'll be wearing the kufiya at school, and they'll be like, right on. I have this acquaintance of mine, though, and initially their response surprised me, because when they saw me wearing the kufiya, they asked what it was about, and I said it's about supporting Palestinian human rights, and then their first thought was to say, oh, that's the side of the terrorists. And I was shocked because they're such a nice, kind person. You wouldn't expect them to say something like that. So I kind of assumed it comes from a place of ignorance, because I always try to assume the best of people. So I told them that, where did you hear that? They said they heard it from their friends, and they've always been sending them pro-Israeli videos and stuff. So that's when I told them that, first of all, if I did support terrorism, I wouldn't be publicly doing it at a high school. That would be really stupid. And second of all, I told them how, Israel has been killing thousands of civilians and how they are apartheid state. And I told them about how the Ottoman Empire basically supported, after they were disassembled, the British took their land, and they supported a homeland for Jewish settlement in Palestine, and how since then Palestinians were oppressed by the state of Israel. And they were totally shocked, because they told me that they've never heard anything like this before. So afterwards, I sent them, I don't know if you heard about the interview Piers Morgan had with Egyptian comedian Basims. I sent it to them because I just wanted to ease them in a way that wasn't too intimidating, and Basim is really funny.
So I actually watched that interview. I actually watched his first appearance on that show and that interview. I have my own thoughts, but I'd like to hear what exactly did you like about his interview?
I think I really liked how he didn't play fake nice. I mean, he addressed the issue very clearly and very directly. And near the end of the interview, he was talking about his family, and he was telling Piers Morgan, well, a lot of Palestinians die, and that's fine, in a sarcastic way, because he's kind of was exposing what Piers Morgan was saying when he asked him, like, what would be the proportionate response, and he was like, I don't know. Basically, he was saying no matter how many Palestinians die, we can never condemn it. And I felt like that was pretty problematic because, basically, no matter what Israel does, we can't condemn it. That's such a dangerous, sentiment to have. And I felt like Basim was directly calling him out. And I really liked that, how strong and confident he was despite being so emotional. You could see tears in his eyes multiple times during the interview.
So how do you respond, or your family responds? Because I get this, and honestly, it angers me when people ask me, don't you condemn what happened on October 7th? And it's almost like, who wouldn't? Who wouldn't condemn any terrorist attack? Who wouldn't condemn any violence? And at the same time, they don't continue to ask, what about all the 75 years of the destruction and people getting kicked out of their homes, killed, children killed, checkpoints? No one talks about any of that. And many different incidences, many different dates we can spit out, right? I mean, it's like a list of dates. But no one asks about those dates. They only ask about October 7th. And in my opinion, if you have the guts to ask about one date, include all the others too from the other side. Don't be just on that one date. Now, how do you propose that we should answer that question, or maybe not answer that question at all? How do you propose as a Palestinian, coming with a Palestinian voice, especially as a young Palestinian who probably gets asked this, how do you handle that question?
I think if someone were to ask me that, I would say that anytime civilians are killed, it's a travesty. But the difference between the IDF, the official military of Israel, and Hamas is, Hamas is a paramilitary group. While Israel has one of the most powerful militaries in the world and is supported by, the United States, the most powerful country in the world. So you can't really, I say, compare and give them the same level of culpability, if that makes sense. And I also think that it's just really convenient that Palestinians have been dying all this time, and the press coverage has only been every single day breaking news because now something is happening to Israel. I see a lot of hypocrisy in that. A while back, a Palestinian-American journalist, her name is Shireen Awakla, she was killed by the state of Israel. There's still no justice for her, even though she's American. In 2002 or 2003, there was a Jewish American named Rachel Corrie. She was bulldozed, standing in front of a Palestinian home. She thought that if she stood in front of it, they wouldn't bulldoze it, but they just bulldozed it and they killed her too. There's no justice for her. So I just feel like there's a type of selective outrage about what kind of innocence we care about, even though more civilians since, 75 years have been dying in Palestine than in Israel. But for some reason, people feel more sorry about this, really isolated incident because Hamas has never launched this kind of attack against the state of Israel before. Israel has killing Palestinians fundamental to the creation of their state. So I guess I'm really disappointed but not surprised.
So when you first came on the show is because I had heard you at a rally a few years ago and your statement. Do you mind sharing with us what you would have said at this rally?
I would love to. I worked on this for over 10 hours, but there was a scheduling conflict with the organizer, so eventually I wasn't able to say it. But here we go. So, Assalamu alaikum, shalom, grace and peace be with you all. Thank you for being here, for today is about our shared humanity, and we come here together to demand more of it from our elected officials. Nadine, a 10-year-old Gazan child, had a message for us Americans in 2021. We can't do anything. We're just dying. The American people, stop giving weapons to the occupiers. That's the way that you can help us. Well, it's 2023, and our elected officials still aren't listening, even as 82% of Gazan children, 40% of the population living in Gaza, constantly fear imminent death. To quote the U.S. Department website, the United States was the first country to recognize Israel as a state in 1948, and the first to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel in 2017. Israel is a great partner to the United States, and Israel has no greater friend than the United States. The United States has given Israel $263 billion in aid just since 1946, with President Biden seeking to give $14.3 billion more this year alone. Under the Leahy Law, it is illegal for the U.S. military to provide training and equipment to foreign security forces that commit human rights abuses. Yet no Israeli unit has ever been prevented from receiving aid due to this law, despite Israel violating 28 UN resolutions. When I first heard about the latest Israel-Gaza crisis, I was heartbroken. I had finally found internal peace as Palestinian and American, and here I was again, certainly not for the last time, scrolling sleeplessly through the news every day. Just since October 7th, over 9,000 people of my shared DNA, almost 4,000 of them children, were slaughtered for the crime of being born in the wrong place. I wonder how many dead family members, broken bones, and traumatizing memories I would carry if I were born in the wrong place. My father once said, "Until the last day of my life, I dream I will have the chance to go back to Palestine. I was pushed out of there. It wasn't my choice to immigrate. Everybody I've met with my background belongs to the country they live in, and yet they still dream of returning. Everybody in the world lives in their country, except for the Palestinians. Palestine lives in them." Despite protests and social media campaigns, U.S. media and policy are always united on the right of Israel to defend itself, at the expense of Palestinian human rights. Muslim White House staffers fear the loss of their careers for speaking up for Palestinian human rights, with one official saying, "I feel like there's no place for me in America anymore, and I'm on thin ice with my clearance because of my heritage and because I care about my people dying." Another said, "It took me till Wednesday or Thursday to have the courage to say, I don't think it would be good for America if we are seen as responsible for killing Palestinian children." There was an awkward silence, like a pin could drop, and I'm like, are they going to report me to the House Un-American Activities Committee? The repression of diverse thought leads to harmful policymaking. The United States was the only country that vetoed a UN resolution calling for a pause in the fighting to allow humanitarian assistance into Gaza. As a result of the siege on Gaza, half of the population are internally displaced. That was at the time of writing this. Now it is 70%. Food, water, and electricity are no longer flowing through Gaza as Israel destroys hundreds of homes and deliberately shatters hospitals, churches, schools, mosques, bakeries, and restaurants. And according to a former UN official, they deliberately target UN facilities. Gaza will eventually turn into a city of tents, said one Israeli defense official, adding, "There will be no buildings." Gazan civilians have fled to Israeli-approved safe areas only to find themselves deliberately targeted regardless of whether or not they obey orders. Gazans fear that if they relocate, they will never return, like the 6 million, and counting, Palestinians that already have become refugees. An Israeli think tank with ties to the Israeli Prime Minister suggested using the Israel-Gaza crisis as an opportunity to permanently displace all Gazans and take over the land once and for all. The state of Israel is an apartheid one, its policies intending to elevate one racial group over another. As said by Israel's current Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel is the national state, not of all of its citizens, but only of the Jewish people. The previous Prime Minister said, the way to deal with Palestinians is to beat them up. Not once, but repeatedly. Beat them up so it hurts so badly until it's unbearable. The same Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, also, he said once that, "I've killed a lot of Arabs in my life, and there's nothing wrong with that." So you can see how deep the racism of the Israeli government goes. In modern times, we're not talking about the 1900s, we're talking about the last Prime Minister and the current Prime Minister. The Israeli Defense Minister, Yoav Gallant, agreed, calling Palestinians human animals, while Gazan parents wrote the names of their children on their bodies so doctors could identify them in hospitals in case they are murdered. Merav Ben Ari of the Israeli parliament said, "The children in Gaza brought it upon themselves." As tens of thousands of protests rally for Palestinian human rights, our voices will create a world where this injustice is another human tragedy laid to rest in our history books. As Martin Luther King Jr. once stated, "The ultimate tragedy is not the oppression and cruelty by the bad people, but the silence over that by the good people. We will no longer remain silent, and we demand justice, for there cannot be peace without it." And in fact, I read in an article today that a protest happening tomorrow in Washington, D.C. is predicted to be the biggest show of Palestinian support in American history. So I'm very proud for our generation and for the future, honestly.
That's excellent. But going back to your generation, by the way, that was a excellent words that you wrote.
Thank you.
But what concerns me is you said there's many people your age. I understand in my age group, there's people who don't know the history because they weren't exposed to it. They didn't have social media. The mainstream media controlled the narrative. There was not many people or Palestinian people that people interacted with to know firsthand. I myself only was exposed to this because I had a friend and I had a family that I grew up closely with when I was growing up, so I was aware of it. If I hadn't, even as a Muslim, I may not have known about it. So in your generation, you're telling me that, and Wachusett is a big school. It's not a small school.
Absolutely.
And if there's people who don't know in the day and age of TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, why do they don't know? Why don't they know or even have a sense of some of the history? The fact that someone thought that there's people out there that I know in my age group that think that Palestine never existed. It's a lie when people say there was something called Palestine on a map. And I understand that because, again, they weren't given the correct information or educated. But in your age group, I'm a little wondering why. I'm wondering why do they not know at least that some issue is happening and that there's two, peoples that are fighting. Well, I wouldn't even say fighting, that one is an occupier occupying someone else's land and, gravely overstepping all human rights. So how is it in your generation that they don't know?
I think that a lot of people find it easy to just close their eyes and look away. We do have an age of information, and thankfully there's a lot of pro-Palestinian content on TikTok, which is helping people get out their voices where otherwise they would not be allowed to speak on mainstream media. But at the same time, there's a lot of people my age, although they are more aware of the issue in general, there are still people who like to be ignorant, that they just find it too difficult to deal with, too emotionally painful, and as concerning, the Israeli apartheid of Palestine, too complicated. People, I feel like politicians and a lot of Israeli propaganda have really popularized this idea that it's too complicated, which is just very convenient that they can continue perpetuating their human rights abuses, and you can't really say anything about it unless you've studied 75 years of history. I mean, that's what a ridiculous proposition to spread, but a lot of people believe in it.
How do you react when people say, we all sort of knew. There were people telling us that when this strike started happening, that there was a bigger agenda, that this was planned all along, that they wanted the Palestinians to kind of go into the Sinai and be Egypt's problem or Jordan's problem.
Yes.
Of course, in the beginning, no one believed it. Everyone kept saying, there's no agenda. We don't believe in conspiracy theories and stories. And, they're just defending themselves. Now, it seems like the people that were saying this, it obviously seems like that's exactly what's happening. And now the world is turning around. There's people in the world saying, why isn't Egypt opening their borders? Why isn't Jordan opening their borders? Right? If it's such a rights about life, why aren't the Muslim Arab countries helping out? Now, I've heard that side of defense of, but that's exactly what Israel wants. And there will never be peace because what are we going to do with all these people that want to go back to the land, that it's their rightful ownership of the land? So What do you say as a young American Palestinian? Because it seems like either, and it's unfortunate, like you said, within what, 4 or 5 days, you went from half the population displaced in Gaza to now 70%, and that's within a few days. So we're looking at days worth of this entire population pretty much either dead or displaced. How do you perceive this issue being resolved? Is it that Israel is going to exactly do what their agenda they planned out, or do you still have hope?
Yeah, I think when I was editing my speech, what was the most devastating to me is every couple of days I would have to edit the death counts. I believe I began at 3,000, then 4,000, 5,000, 6,000, until eventually, 9,000. So it's, and also 23,000 are wounded while Israel continues to actively bomb hospitals, and they barely have any hospitals to begin with. So, as for people who say, why doesn't Egypt just open its borders? Why doesn't Jordan just open their borders? Well, first of all, even if they were to allow some refugees, Gaza has millions of people. There's no way they can accept them all. With the reality on the ground with the Middle East, which is constant political instability, they already have large amounts of refugees all over the Middle East. And the second thing is that even if Arab countries don't open their borders, that can't be used as an excuse. They didn't open their borders, therefore, they just wanted people of Gaza to die. Ultimately, Israel and the Israeli army and the Israeli government are perpetuating their occupation, their oppression, and their slaughter. So that's the country that we should be looking for to blame. It's ultimately, if the Arab countries did open their borders and allowed all the Palestinians, which is definitely not possible at all, that's it. Land would be taken over forever. Israel has had an official policy of land clearing since its beginning. In the village of Dar Yassin, this was in the 1900s when Israel just was beginning to be established, they killed about 300 civilians. They mutilated people, they tortured people, they raped men, women, and children. A prominent Israeli official, the premier of Israel at the time, he was part of Irgun. It's considered a terrorist group, and he was the premier of Israel. That's how deep it goes. One of the Zionist officials I was reading about, they had said that policy, people die in war, and if we didn't kill the Arabs then, there would be 500,000 of them still in Palestine. So almost like it's a sad inevitability that millions of Palestinians have to die. Like, he's praising the action, and this is not just right-wing extremists in Israel. This is something that centrists, leftists, moderates, they're all pretty much united on. But as for hope, I think I often think to myself, who would benefit from me losing hope? Would it be the Palestinians who are getting killed by the thousands? There was a report released that these few weeks alone, since October 7th, more Palestinian children have died than all children of the world died in 2019. Which is obviously atrocious, but we can't say that's disproportionate. But despite all this, I think that as a Palestinian living in America, as I said in my speech, I often think a few degrees to the left, what would my fate have been? I feel like it's my responsibility and the responsibility of our generation, which is, again, the most pro-Palestinian generation in America, to keep standing up for human rights. I think about how many, it took hundreds of years for segregations to end. And still, after that, African Americans were oppressed. So I just feel like no matter how long and dark the road is, history kind of shows us that the human spirit will always want freedom. And as long as we keep that hope alive, and as long as we look to thousands of pro-Palestinian, tens of thousands, pro-Palestinian protests across the world, increasing support in America, I really think that the only way to go is up, honestly.
That's excellent. We only have a few minutes left. Do you have anything you'd like to say to the audience who may still be on the fence or don't feel like they should be, as they say, taking sides?
I remember something that Martin Luther King said. He said something, that's not the exact quote, something about how the biggest enemy to black liberation is the white moderate. And I think the same kind of principle holds here, where people are so scared of being politically incorrect or not being balanced that they are willing to turn their eyes away from a genocide, away from a country that has openly declared and openly stated that they have to kill Arabs to make space for their settlement. And I just think that regardless of what, fringe groups here and there have done, you can't ignore the reality on the ground, which is since establishing the State of Israel in 1948, since 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from their land, we can even look to this day about how the apartheid is continuing, how over 99% of Palestinians who are seen as guilty in court, they don't really have a chance. Their trials go, and 99% of the time they're guilty. They don't have representation. People are tortured. People are raped. Their homes are demolished. They are seen as less. I just wonder how many people, we can even think about the northern states during the period of segregation before the Civil War. A lot of them said, well, we won't have slavery here. We won't expand it. But the southern states, they can do what they want. And I think that it's a ridiculous premise to be able to tell yourself that you can sit on the sidelines and that's just being moderate and that's just being balanced. I think that's an excuse people tell themselves so they can sleep at night while actively ignoring a genocide and feel that their country, because a lot of things happen all across the world that they're horrendous and they're terrible. And while we can raise money and while we can raise awareness, maybe there's not much that we can do from our home country. But the fact of the matter is, Israel has no greater supporter than the United States. We are directly involved in this conflict. Not this conflict, it's even ingrained in me. The apartheid of Palestinians. We have actively supported it since the creation of Israel. President Truman, first president in the world to recognize it since 1948. So we have ultimately a responsibility to prevent the apartheid being perpetuated by our own government. Like we have outrage for cases all across the world, let's have outrage and let's have political pressure put on things that are being caused by our country and funded by our tax dollars. And ultimately, if we do not speak out against that, we are just as responsible.
We're almost done. We only have a few seconds, but I couldn't have said it better. On perspectives, I'm always trying to do shows that mainstream media is not covering. And one of the hot topics, the current topics, I know there has been a lot of lives lost, especially Palestinian lives. And as much as we can talk about history and October 7th and all the dates beforehand, what is happening right now is a lot of children are dying, Palestinian children. That is what is actually happening right now, which we have a chance to save if we speak up and if we start asking for policy changes. And that's what I think we all need to concentrate on, because the West has always been known to apologize after. Let's start changing that. Let's start saving lives, and instead, just not from the sidelines, watch it happen, and then apologize after. Thank you for watching Perspectives with Asima Silva, and I hope you join again.